So as I'm reflecting more and more on my childhood and the way I grew up living in the post-Soviet country, I do come to appreciate more and more the remnants of the Soviet Union. Even though the infrastructure, the houses, everything is falling apart, you cannot blame the Soviets because all of this had to be maintained, right? And it wasn't. A lot of the repairs we get nowadays, they're very cheap and they fall apart within a year or two. Like the roads, they keep on being repaired, but they keep on getting the potholes all the time. Like year in, year out, we get a new pothole in the road. It is almost like it is an inevitable part of living in here. However, during the Soviet times, it was different. Maintenance was done effectively. People would repair something and it would amazingly work for a few years and not need to be repaired because the goals were different. The goals were not profit. The goals were not to steal something. Corruption was not as prominent just because it was harder to do. It was punishable by law and people had a different conscience. So it was not as high as we have nowadays. And I do remember very vividly growing up in the 90s, the talks of corruption were probably like the #1 political discourse in these lands. People always talked about political corruption and how politicians are always so corrupt. Like we've got to find honest politicians, and everyone was so cynical about all these state institutions, and people were like, well, all you have to do is just bribe these people. Everything is done here because of bribes. I do remember this very, very well. And as I kept getting more information from all over the world, I realized that this corruption phenomenon, it is not exclusive to our country. It's not exclusive to our people. And it is actually exclusive to the capitalist mode of production. People are pushed towards corruption whenever they gain some kind of power position. They're going to use it for their own advantage. And in the capitalist world, you can't really blame them for that because of the ideology of individualism. What do we expect from them? They're doing the best for themselves. They don't care about others. That is what the capitalist ideology proposes, ultimately. It's a sociopathic ideology. I'm not going to call it psychopathic. And the words sociopath, psychopath are kind of arbitrary and they are not really appropriate terms anymore, but I am still using them as figures of speech more than anything else. But going back to corruption, corruption in the United States is legalized by being called lobbying, and in some other places as well. So yeah, we're not unique in our corruption problem, and the corruption problem in the USSR was not as prominent. In the later period of the Soviet Union, in like the late 70s, 80s, and of course at the beginning of the 90s, the corruption was steadily rising. But that is because the state apparatus was slowly but steadily crumbling into pieces, and the communist ideals were not upheld. They were upheld on paper. People would speak those words, but they wouldn't really understand what it meant. And I'm not going to go into the whole why the Soviet Union collapsed and why the state apparatus became corrupt. I'm not going to talk about this because this is a conversation for like 2 weeks in length. But what I am going to mention is that I have enough compelling evidence to claim that in the Soviet Union, throughout different periods of the Soviet Union, corruption was not such big of a problem. It would emerge every now and again, and if you're interested, I will keep recommending this book, Socialism Betrayed, which kind of goes into some of these events, kind of analyzes the different time periods of the Soviet Union, but it was not like a major built-in part of the government structure. That, of course, doesn't mean that the state shouldn't wither away, but we never got to that stage, right? And I don't know if we ever will. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. History will show. The fact that I am grateful to still have the remnants of the Soviet Union present in my life. I shared this on TikTok. I don't remember if I shared it here or not, but I'll share it again. I live in the apartment, this apartment that was built in 1969. So it is pretty old. This is kind of a unique apartment building as far as I know. And I mean, I have quite a few pieces of evidence that this is true. The architects who were working on a lot of major projects in our city, they built this apartment building for themselves. And like, I knew personally one of these people, he passed away because of old age a few years ago, but he was still alive. He built this house for himself, of course not with his own hands, but he was one of the people who worked on the project, so he could tell us about the vision. And the vision is there. This apartment building is quite unique. Every single apartment is unique. It doesn't have the same floor plan as every other one does, so it's not a typical floor plan. You know, there was a lot of typical floor plans in the Soviet Union just for efficiency's sake. They would just try to build these houses as fast as possible to provide as many people as possible with housing, and later they were planning to replace those buildings with more, you know, unique, beautiful, nice type of houses. And in some areas they got to doing that, and in other areas they didn't. And so we do have a lot of houses that were built in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 80s. And now the houses that were built in the 90s and the 2000s, they're not great. It's getting a little bit better, arguably. We still don't know. Like, some of these buildings were built fairly recently, so only time will tell how they're going to hold up. But there are quite a few buildings that were built very recently, and they're falling apart. The infrastructure there is really, they lie about the materials. They lie about, you know, how sturdy everything is. So like the piping may like burst and people don't have access to water anymore in the center of the city. I talked to quite a few people who live in more modern buildings, and some of them got lucky and their apartment or their house is okay, but others not so. It really is like a gamble nowadays with the modern production. And another thing, infrastructure-wise, that I really appreciate is that basically, I live in a 15-minute city. So most of the Soviet cities were built to have the micro-districts that would have everything that was necessary for a certain amount of people. For example, schools, kindergartens, markets, stores, and a hospital. Like, not every single micro-district has a hospital, but most do. And some even have like the whole hospital complexes. Like, for example, nearby we have an entire like complex of hospitals. They're still state hospitals where they have like everything in there, and it's pretty expensive to go there nowadays. Like, they have part that is a state part and part that is privatized. We kind of have this mixed system still, but for convenience sake, it's very comfortable. Like, you go to this giant hospital complex and you can do everything. You can run all the tests, they have all the equipment, and it's efficient. And now it's not great because a lot of the equipment is very outdated. Some of the equipment is like from the 70s as well, but it's still working. Imagine how sturdy it has to be to keep on working for that many years. And the modern additions to this type of 15-minute city infrastructure, they are devastating. Whenever they build those new apartment complexes, this new kind of infrastructure, it doesn't really fit. Everything looks so ugly to me because of this, and it's so inefficient. Like, it's so much harder to walk, and it's becoming worse and worse. Like, as they build more and more of the new infrastructure, it's just becoming unwalkable. So some parts of the city now are no longer a part of the 15-minute city. So you have to have a car to get to them. So they're kind of trying to emulate United Arab Emirates. They're not even trying to emulate the United States because we don't have as much space in here. But I've been to the United Arab Emirates a lot. Like, we used to travel there all the time. And this is what our state is trying to replicate. They're trying to replicate those highways in the desert, but we don't have deserts, we have steppes. So they're kind of trying to do that, but it's not really working because they're not willing to spend as much resources as the people in the United Arab Emirates are seemingly doing. And our capital, especially the city center that was completely renovated, because our capital used to be just like a regular run-of-the-mill Soviet town, but they rebuilt the entire city center, and now it does resemble superficially Dubai, kind of. That's the vibe I think they were going for, and kind of looks beautiful, you know, at night from different angles. Like, if you have a drone, you can take beautiful pictures of it. Yeah, and it's kind of nice, but it's very uncomfortable. People say that traveling there is like a whole hassle because they have a river, and, you know, one thing is on one riverbank, another thing is on another riverbank, and it used to be that every single bank was more or less self-sufficient, but now they've separated everything, so people need to travel a lot more than before. Takes a lot of time, takes a lot of resources. Again, goes to show that capitalism doesn't care about efficiency. Capitalism doesn't care about saving resources. Capitalism only cares about profit. If it's profitable to build all these unnecessary pieces of infrastructure, it's going to be done under this type of mode of production. So I am grateful that I still have access to these remnants of the Soviet history. I am grateful that I still can walk to a lot of my destinations. A lot of the people here are used to just walking everywhere. It used to be very uncommon for people to even have a car. And this is one of the talking points in the anti-Soviet propaganda, is that, oh, people didn't have access to transportation. Like, we had public transportation that was amazing. We had trams, we had trolley buses before all the talks of sustainable energy. Soviet Union was thinking ahead of saving energy, and we have these trolley buses still that run on electricity. It is not unusual to me to take a trolley bus from one part of the city to another, and it still works. It still works, even though those trolley buses, they're newer ones. We replaced the Soviet ones because the Soviet ones were completely fallen apart. We replaced them. They're fine. They're Korean ones, I think, but they are still running. And unfortunately, in our city, they got rid of the trams, which was such a big hit to a lot of people because we had a lot of great childhood memories connected to trams, and now we don't have them anymore. So we still have a lot of buses. The bus system could have used improvements, definitely. Even in the Soviet times, the buses were not like perfect. Like, there were usually overflowing. We didn't have enough buses, but now it's kind of the same. Nothing really changed. But I'm grateful that I'm at least capable of taking public transportation and not just rely on a car. I can't drive, and it's something that I find very stressful. Even thinking about learning to drive is stressing me out. I probably will need to learn one day, but my husband drives, we have a car, but I hate it. I hate riding in a car. It's suffocating to me. I feel claustrophobic, I feel road sick, whatever, and it's just not a nice experience. Like, public transportation is so much more accessible to a lot of people, and it saves a lot of energy, and it saves a lot of other resources as well. So I'm happy that we have inherited this public transportation. We do have a metro system, subway system in here as well, which is very new. It was built very recently, like within my lifetime. It was built like maybe 10 years ago or so. It's fine. It's not as beautiful and intricate as many of the subway systems in other cities that I visited are. Like in Russia, in Moscow and St. Petersburg, they've got these amazing metro subways built by the Soviets. Ours, they're fine. They're doing the job. They're still pretty new. They're running pretty smoothly, which I appreciate. The Soviets didn't build subways here because it was not safe, and it's still not safe because we live in a very earthquake-prone zone. Like, we live in between these plate tectonics, I think they're called, and a devastating earthquake more than 100 years ago completely destroyed the settlement that was here before the city was built. So yeah, it is not a safe decision to build a subway. It is convenient and it is nice, but I wish our modern government had a little bit more care about our safety, because if we have a major earthquake, all of this is going to be tumbling down and taking lives away with it. So I know that this may sound like the old person reminiscing about the good old days, but the funny thing to me is that I'm reminiscing of the good old days I didn't even fully partake in. But to me, it just goes to show that socialism has the goal of the prosperity and happiness and fulfillment for all human beings, and capitalist mode of production only cares about profit. It doesn't matter how efficient, effective, beautiful, nice something is. It's just going to be produced for the sake of profit, and that's the end of the story. So I am saddened to see a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the buildings fall apart because nobody maintains them. But I'm happy that I got to experience them, at least. So let me know what you think. Let me know what you know about Soviet infrastructure, because I keep learning from various people from all over the world, and I'm really excited and happy to do that. And I hope you have a great day today, and I'll talk to you sometime later.